This series is brought to you by you. Thank you so much for all of my patrons and the people who have used the Jackson's affiliate links. It is thanks to you guys that this series have been made possible. Thank you so much. Hello, how are you? It's so nice to be back. It's so lovely to be talking to you guys. And I'm really excited that the first video I get to make for you guys is the first episode of the new season 2 of the Colossal Color Showdown. The first color we're going to be looking at in this season is the Ultramarine Violet. Now, I've tried recording this video before. I occasionally say ultramarine blue instead of ultramarine violet because I get a bit too excited about the colors. So please forgive me if I say that again in this recording. I will try my very best to make sure I say ultramarine violet instead of ultramarine blue. The tests we're going to be doing in this season are exactly the same as last season so that the colors are very comparable. We are also sticking to choosing color by its color name rather than the pigment code. And the reason why we do that on this series is two reasons. One is that there are other videos out there that focus on each pigment code and the different colors that are available from different brands. And the other thing is I want this series to help beginners as well as people who are more advanced in exploring watercolor. And one of the things that we do as beginners is buy paints according to their paint name rather than by pigment code. We learn about pigment code later on. And I'm sure we've all experienced this thing where we buy a paint because of the paint name and the color turns out completely different. And I really want this series to highlight those weird anomalies in the watercolor that each brand offers, and the best way to do that is to select colors by their color name. There is, however, a couple of episodes in this season that I have gone against that philosophy, and that is because a couple of colors are very well known to have lots of different names in lots of different brands, like the Pyro Red, and I think the other one is Indanthrone Blue. So in those two episodes we have gone by the pigment code because otherwise we're gonna have like one or two colors on the sheet and that's it. I've also changed up the brands from the first season to this season, and that is to ensure that we get as many colors on the test sheet as possible rather than have lots of blank spaces where I've selected a brand that doesn't cover most of the colors that are going to be featured in this season. We have 3 very exciting new brands to this series. One is the Roman Szmal, which you've seen me test out all their colors thanks to their very kind donation. And I think it'd be incredibly interesting to see how Roman Szmal actually compares with other brands. The other 2 brands that we are going to be testing out this season that are new to us are the Old Holland and the MaimeriBlue. These 2 brands are completely new to me as well, so I'm very excited to see how these 3 new brands compare to the other brands. So let's get started with the actual color comparison itself. And as always, we start off by just looking at the hues of each brand. So in terms of the brands, we have Daniel Smith's Holbein. Holbein doesn't actually have an ultramarine violet, so for this episode, Holbein's going to take a back seat. Schmincke, Sennelier, Winsor Newton, QoR, M. Graham, Roman Szmal, Mission Gold, Da Vinci, Old Holland, and MaimeriBlue. In terms of the name, all the brands call their ultramarine violet, except for Sennelier, who called their color blue violet. PV15 is the standard ultramarine violet, and all the brands contain PV15. Most brands contain just PV15, but we do have a few exceptions. The Schmincke one has PB29 and so does the M. Graham one, and then Mission Gold goes crazy and throws in a PV15 PB15:3, that is your phthalo blue green shade, and then your PR122, which is often used in quinacridone magenta. So for the rest of this video I'm going to just say quinacridone magenta instead of PR122. Now, I know that Mission Gold has created the Pure Pigments range where it's colors that have just one single pigment, and there are a lot of duplicate colors in their range where you get one version which has crazy number of other pigments and then a single pigment color under the same name. However, I'm not featuring the single pigment range in this series, and that is for the practical reason that it's almost impossible to get hold of the single pigment colors, especially in open stock. So for the majority of the world, if you have access to Mission Gold, what you get is the more mixed up versions of color rather than the single pigment ones. So I want to feature the ones that you're going to come across as a beginner to the brand, rather than the one that you have to learn about later on, and then you have to basically go to South Korea to actually be able to buy them open stock. I hope that makes sense to you guys. In terms of hue, there are two variations that are common in Ultramarine Violet. You get the more warmer redder violet colors, which are the majority of the brands, and then there are a handful of brands that do the blue violet versions. And it's really up to you as to which version you want to go for. I will go into the more details of which version you should go for in terms of color theory and how to adjust your palette according to whether you go for the red violet or the blue violet, because that really messes around with people's palette and color mixing, but that will be in the next episode. In terms of hue, as I said, two different kinds, Schmincke and M. Graham are the blue violets. In terms of granulation, I can see that some colors granulate really heavily, such as the Schmincke, Winsor Newton, and probably the Da Vinci one, although Schmincke and Winsor Newton is by far the most granulating, and then there's a big dip before the Da Vinci one gets in. So if you are looking for a heavily granulating ultramarine violet, and if you want the blue violet, go for the Schmincke. If you want the red violet, go for the Winsor Newton. It's quite normal for the ultramarine violets to be very difficult to re-wet, and that might be a thing that you struggle with on your palette. A lot of these colors were hard to re-wet. The Daniel Smith was hard to re-wet, so it was Winsor Newton, QoR, and I think the MaimeriBlue. They were the hardest ones to re-wet. If you don't want to be dealing with hard to re-wet colors, I always recommend brands that contain honey in them. And for this show, we have the Sennelier, which was very easy to re-wet. M. Graham as well, incredibly easy to re-wet. In fact, I don't think it had set properly or dried out properly. The paint was still soft after letting it dry for about 2 weeks. And then also the Old Holland. If you're not keen on brands that have honey in them, and some people don't like to have honey in them, but you still want the paint to be easy to re-wet, then I have to say the Roman Szmal wins out, because it was easy to re-wet, not very easy to re-wet like the honey containing brands, but it was definitely a lot easier to re-wet than all the other red violet colors. So if you are very focused on easy to wetness, then go for the honey included brands or the Roman Szmal one. A couple of problems I had in creating this swatch. One was with Mission Gold, and you'll be able to see it better in the high res scans that I provide for the patrons that go with every video that I create. And if you go onto patreon.com/Oto Kano, you will be able to find a high res scan of this test sheet up on there as well. But with Mission Gold, I don't know, it had these little dots of paint that didn't do anything, and it just sat there and I couldn't dissolve it or anything. So that was a problem with the Mission Gold. I had a separate problem with MaimeriBlue. I know it looks like it's a very similar problem to the dot problems I had with Mission Gold, but it was actually created in a very different way. With the MaimeriBlue, I wasn't able to get hold of a tube of watercolor, so I had to get a half pan of this color. And because it's hard to re-wear, you're scrubbing away with your brush a lot, and that inevitably, when you're having to scrub at the paint a lot, you create bubbles, and the bubbles that were created with the MaimeriBlue Ultramarine Violet didn't go away for ages, so you just end up painting with the bubble, and that's what these little circles are from, are the bubbles in the paint. The other very interesting thing that you get with the MaimeriBlue is it does granulate, but it's granulating in a very different way to what you normally expect from a granulating color. Schmincke and Winsor Newton shows you how you normally expect a color to granulate. However, with the MaimeriBlue, it's very almost like gem-like, or it's almost semi-precious stone-like in terms of how it's granulating. And I really hope that the camera can pick it up. But if you want a more detailed look, again, high-res scan over on Patreon, patreon.com/Oto Kano. And I think it's a beautiful granulation. It's incredibly unique. I've not seen a paint granulate like that. It's a very different granulation to the standard granulation that you actually expect. Right, on to the next one, and let's talk about prices and other features that these paints have. In terms of binder split, there was only one brand that had the binder split from the pigment, and that was the Sennelier's one. I did have a considerable amount of binder that split away from the pigment in Sennelier's paint. Another thing that I want to let you know is that the QoR Ultramarine Violet, it was very hard to squeeze out of the tube. It's a very solid paint. And it's not like gone solid like my Cobalt Violet did from, I think it was M. before, that they very kindly replaced afterwards. It's not solid, but it's definitely harder to push out of the tube. So if you have some dexterity problems, then you might want to avoid QoR's one. And by the way, if you have the QoR's Ultramarine Violet and you've not had this problem, please do let us know in the comments down below so that we know that it's just my tube rather than it being a standard thing, or it might be a standard thing. Either way, if you have a tube of Ultramarine Violet by QoR, do let me know how hard or easy it is to squeeze paint out of your tube is. On to Old Holland. Most watercolors don't smell, and in fact I've not come across a smelly watercolor before, but I've definitely noticed it with Old Holland paints. When I've had samples sent to me, they've definitely had a smoky smell to it, and I was wondering if that was a problem with the sample, if it was a brand thing. And I'm starting to think that it's more of a brand thing, because about half of the colors that I've poured out for this series, about 5, definitely have this strong smoky smell, and the intensity of the smell varies depending on the color. However, a lot of them do smell, so I know some of you are very sensitive to smell. And if you are, then I cannot recommend Old Holland paints to you, because they have such strong smell that it's very difficult to ignore, and it could probably trigger migraines and headaches and things. So definitely avoid it if you're sensitive to certain smells like that. We have one color that have another color option that are quite similar, and that is M. has an Ultramarine Violet Deep that is PV15. So when we look at the chart, we see that the M. Ultramarine Violet itself is mixed in with Ultramarine Blue. It's actually mostly Ultramarine Blue, but M. does actually offer the more red violet color as well, if you actually prefer M. one, but in the red violet rather than the blue violet. I think this is the only brand that we certainly feature in this series that actually offer both the red violet and the blue violet. So if you're a fan of M. it might be worth trying out both colors to see which ones you like. In terms of price, we have the most expensive being QoR as usual at £1.17 per milliliter, and the cheapest one is Mission Gold at 33 pence per milliliter. Now the prices I show you on this series is based from prices I get from Jackson's. Obviously prices will vary depending on where you are and what brand is cheap. So in terms of price please do your own research before picking a brand by its price point. Another thing I need to mention is that with Roman Szmal, they only come in full pan, and it's actually very difficult to estimate how much wet paint has gone in to fill that full pan, because what happens when you fill a full pan with paint, as I'm sure most of you will know, it will dry a bit and then you have to top it up and then dry a bit and then top it up. So it's actually really hard to estimate how much liquid actually went in, because it's not just the capacity of the pan itself, and it also changes depending on the brand and the color and how much it evaporates and shrinks. So I'm just gonna keep it simple and put the price of the full pan down rather than trying to work out a per milliliter price that is inaccurate. Right, so let's look at the opacity next. This is the opacity. I can see immediately that the most transparent ones are the Daniel Smith one and the MaimeriBlue one. And the most opaque one is the Sennelier, Roman Szmal and the QoR one, which is quite interesting because if we go back to the information sheets, now for transparency, we are looking at the square icons and see what's in it. A lot of the brands, in fact, most of the brands, declare ultramarine violet as a transparent or a semi-transparent color. It's only the old Holland one that classify it as opaque. However, I would say that the Sennelier one is showing up as more opaque than the old Holland one. So I would actually take what they brands classify as the... So I would take the classification of opacity for ultramarine violet with a pinch of salt for most brands, because it's very dependent on what other kind of opaque and transparent colors they have and whether they make a separation between semi-transparent and semi-opaque and how many different categories they have on the opacity scale. But in terms of from the experiment, I would say that Sennelier, Roman Szmal and QoR is the most opaque one, and then Daniel Smith and MaimeriBlue being the most transparent. And finally, we move on to lift and glaze. And with the glaze, I'm just going to go over what I do for the test so that you can refamiliarize yourself for it. What I do is get a clean brush, wet it, and then just go over the swatch 3 times, pat it dry with a kitchen towel, and then repeat that twice more. And I do that exactly the same for all the colors. In terms of easiest color to lift, was by far the old Holland one and the MaimeriBlue one. These 2 colors came off very cleanly, very easily. The moment you touch a wet brush, especially on old Holland, it will start lifting from the paper and start moving about. So if you like a paint to be very easy to lift, then definitely go for Old Holland or MaimeriBlue. The hardest one to lift definitely is the Mission Gold, and that's not surprising because it does have the phthalo blue green shade and the quinacridone magenta color mixed in there, and those 2 colors are very staining, very difficult to lift colors. And this is why it can be a problem to start throwing in random colors into a color that doesn't probably need so many pigments mixed in, because other brands can produce single pigment PV15 very easily, and at least with the blue violets they mix it with another pigment, an ultramarine blue, which behaves in a very similar way to ultramarine violet. But when you start putting transparent, high staining, artificial pigments in with what is a natural, very easy to lift, granulating color, then you're going to start having a paint that behaves unexpectedly to what you expect from the fact that it's called ultramarine violet. Now, a surprise, however, has been the Sennelier's blue violet PV, and the reason why it's a surprise is because it was a very hard to lift color, almost as hard as the Mission Gold's one. And it was surprising to me because it's supposed to be a single pigment PV15 should be the same as all the other red violets, but this was by far the hardest single pigment PV15 color to lift. And then these guys, the rest of them, the Winsor Newton QoR, Daniel Smith and the Vinci, they're about medium. In my head, ultramarine violets should be relatively easy to lift, and so if you want to go for a red violet, I actually recommend Old Holland, MaimeriBlue and Szmal. Szmal came up very cleanly as well. And then with the blue violets, they're fine. I would say both of them are medium staining or medium easy to lift, but it's definitely not as bad as these guys. These guys are not having a good time at the moment in this series. On to glazing. Now with glazing, if you have an easy to lift paint, then you're going to get into some sticky situation when it comes to glazing, because you actually want the paint to stay on the paper and then be able to paint over that without that paint lifting up. Because ultramarine violet is a relatively easy paint to lift, you're going to get this mottled look around here that make the glaze you put on top uneven because you're lifting up the pigment from the layer below. I would say by far the best glazer is actually the Daniel Smith one. The Daniel Smith one, you can see that the glaze went on pretty evenly and without disturbing the paint underneath, like say the M. Graham one. If I had to pick a second best, I would say the Da Vinci one is pretty good as well. So that's it for this episode. However, if you are a pigment fiend like me and you're really into your ultramarine violets, I have actually made a companion dot card to go with this series. Each color set will have its own dot cards, and this month's Patreon dot card is of course the ultramarine blue, because that's the color we're covering this month. I have gone over the dot card with a wet brush so you can have an idea of each color that we have, but you will get a clean brand new dot card. And on this dot card we have Daniel Smith, Schmincke, Sennelier, M. Graham, Mission Gold, Ultramarine Violet, not Ultramarine Violet, Winsor Newton, QoR and Da Vinci, so that you can do your own test and really see it in real life, because videos are great and you can get the relative ideas between the colors, like how they relate to each other and how they differ from each other, but nothing beats seeing the paints yourself. So if you want to have this dot card arrive on your doorstep, then do head on over to patreon.com/Oto Kano and sign up for the appropriate tiers to receive the dot cards. Buying the dot cards by far goes to supporting this series, so thank you so much to everyone who have signed up to buy this dot card already this month, and for anyone new that wants to sign up. Also, if this video has inspired you to buy one of these colors, I have left Jackson affiliate links down below as to where you can get them, and the affiliate links are great because it doesn't cost you anything, and what happens is Jackson gives me a little bit of commission on what you buy, but obviously doesn't change the price you pay, and all of the commission that I gain goes straight back into producing these videos. So please do use the affiliate links if any of my videos have inspired you to buy some paint. Well, thank you so very much for joining me on this first episode of the new seasons of the Colossal Color Showdown. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next episode, we are going to carry on looking at ultramarine violet, but we're going to look at how they gradate and how they mix with other colors and how they react with salts. So I hope you're excited for that. That'll be coming out next week. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye!